Namaste and welcome to our second part in the series on karma yoga. Welcome to the people that are watching this live stream and to our audience here. Before speaking, I would like to offer my respects to my spiritual teachers and to the Supreme Lord. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Sri Mate Siddhaswarupananda Paramahamsa Iti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Vastatya Dishatarane Bhaja Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Ganadhar Sri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hey Krishna Kauruna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kantaradha Kanta Namostute Haribol. So we've already had quite a few questions coming in. So it looks like we will be doing a fourth part in this series, and we will try to deal with those at the end. Today we're dealing with the topic of, is karma avoidable? Previous talk was about understanding karma, and I think it's probably really important, if you haven't looked at that yet, after looking at this live stream, perhaps jump back to it and take a look at it. It's not too long, and it will give you a context for the subject that we're talking about. So today's question is karma avoidable? We've learned that karma is definitely a problem. It is through karma and the desire associated with it that we become bound to this world. Being bound to this world and the repeated cycle of birth and death, we will perpetually experience different kinds of pain and difficulty. There may be high points and happy moments, but there will also be a corresponding amount of pain and suffering and difficulty associated with that. And the biggest problem is, while we remain materially entangled and absorbed in the material concept of life, thinking that this body I have on in this lifetime is who I am, I will not be able to actually be in touch with and experience my true spiritual identity and the actual deep spiritual happiness and spiritual love that comes from that realization and experience. So, is karma then avoidable? And the answer is both yes and no. And when I say yes, it is avoidable, and I will be talking about it's not going to be in the way that most people think. In the Bhagavad Gita, in the very beginning, we have this, the Bhagavad Gita is a conversation between Arjuna, who is a warrior prince, and Lord Krishna. Lord Krishna is accepted as being the Supreme Lord himself, who appeared within this world. And he spoke, and this conversation with Arjuna is known as the Bhagavad Gita, which literally means the Song of God. And Arjuna was in this dilemma. He was a fierce and powerful warrior. He was so incredibly heroic. There was not a slightest drop of cowardice in his nature. And he had proven himself innumerable times, even fighting single-handedly against hundreds and even more, thousands of soldiers at different times. So he had that reputation, and it was part of, this, he had this characteristic. In this particular battle, he had asked Krishna, who was acting as his chariot driver, to bring his chariot down between the two armies, that opposing armies, and he wanted to view all of the people that were participating. And it suddenly dawned on him that there are people here who are my respected and worshipable teachers, my grandfather. There are what was considered in Vedic time brothers, a cousin, because families grew up together and extended families, cousins were also considered brothers and sisters. The fathers-in-law, there was this situation where he now sees that all of these intimate family members and really respected personalities, they're going to be engaged in this horrific act of warfare. We're not talking about standing back from a distance and launching some missile or something. It was face to face. You actually walk up to someone and hack them with a sword. It was like fierce combat. And he suddenly became overwhelmed, thinking that if I engage in this activity, it is utterly sinful. And if I engage in this activity, I will be responsible for much suffering, not just from the act of killing people or fighting against people, but the consequence, what will happen to society, the effect it will have on others. It just dawned on him, he had felt this enormous burden to the point where he completely lost his composure, began to actually shed tears, and his whole body was shaking, and he said that he was unable to hold his weapon, his bow, and sat down almost collapsing on the chariot, and asked Krishna, what should I do? But he had proposed that if he was to engage in this activity, it would actually be considered very sinful, and because it is sinful activity, he will be held responsible. There will be a sinful reaction. And so he thought it is better that he simply walks away from this and he goes to live in the mountains as a monk. And in doing that, he will be able to escape the consequence, that he won't experience a sinful reaction by not engaging in this activity. So this is one kind of idea that people have, and there are different spiritual paths and different undertakings that different people and groups of people have done over time. And when they do this, there is this basically idea, if I hightail it out of here, if I avoid action, I can become free from this material condition. The idea of running away. So in the Bhagavad Gita, in the 2nd chapter, in the 10th and 11th verse, Lord Krishna says to Arjuna, O descendant of Bharata. He said, at this time Krishna, smiling in the midst of both armies, spoke the following words to the grief-stricken Arjuna. The blessed Lord said, while speaking learned words, you are mourning for what is not worthy of grief. Those who are wise lament neither for the living nor for the dead. So the only part of this that I want to deal with right now is that Krishna is making the point that while you may act what may appear to be religiously or morally, or in an attempt to avoid engaging in any activity, you cannot necessarily escape karmic reaction. That you will be, as we will discuss, you will be forced to act. So if I cannot just run away from things, is there actually a solution? And the point was then made by Krishna later on in the 4th chapter, in the 16th verse and 17th verse of the Bhagavad Gita. He says, even the intelligent are bewildered in determining what is action and what is inaction. Now I shall explain to you what is action, knowing which you shall be liberated from all sinful reaction. The intricacies of actions are very hard to understand, therefore one should know properly what action is, what forbidden action is, and what inaction is. So, just making the point there that the subject of karma, of action, and how to deal with it, and the role it plays, but mostly how I should deal with the subject of action in my own life and the choices that I make, is being described here as quite complicated. Arjuna was thinking, okay, I just run away from this battle and I will escape the consequences of acting wrongly. And Krishna was telling him, though, it's not quite that easy. And there is one thing that needs to be considered. My escaping responsibility or avoiding an action right now doesn't mean my consciousness has changed, doesn't mean I have changed. Speaking to that point, in the 3rd chapter, in the 5th verse of Bhagavad Gita, all men, meaning mankind, are forced to act helplessly, according to the impulses born of the modes of material nature, and therefore no one can refrain from doing something, even for a moment. One who restrains the senses of the organs of action, but whose mind dwells on sense objects, certainly deludes himself and is called a pretender. So this is like, whoa, this is getting kind of serious. What happens is that in the embodied state, when I take on a material body and a material mind, that body and mind will have a certain impulses and certain characteristics determined by these invisible forces known as the modes of material nature, where I will act more in a way that is what's called in the mode of goodness, in the mode of passion, or in the mode of ignorance or darkness. And even though I may try to escape a karmic result by saying I'm not going to do this and run away from it, it hasn't changed me. That act alone, the act of trying to just renounce action, does not change me. All it does is put things off. My material nature that I'm being influenced by is still going to be there. This body that I have and the type of mind that I have that's covering me, this spiritual being, will again cause me to desire to act or to react to something going forward. And Krishna says that if one simply tries to artificially stop all activity, but if their mind is continuously going to material thoughts and desires, I am described here as a pretender, because eventually I will be forced to act. So this, of course, raises a question of what is true renunciation and what is false renunciation. If there is only some external refraining from activity, but internally in my mind I am still dwelling on desire and material activity, I will be forced to act. If there is such a condition as true renunciation, but it is completely different than this idea of just externally giving things up. Now, here Krishna begins to introduce the idea that part of real change and internal change in dealing with karma, this is the beginning of the introduction of the idea of karma yoga. It has to do with the concept of duty. When you have a material body, when you have a station in life, there are responsibilities that come with it. Learning to perform those responsibilities and accepting the duty that is assigned to me in this station in life, my condition in life, and acting with a sense of duty is a really important starting point for someone that wants to attain a transcendental position. So the concept of duty means about, it's really focused on the idea of acting in life, but without a strong attachment to the outcomes, performing activities out of a sense of duty. This idea will be further developed. We're just touching on this for now. So towards the later part of the Bhagavad Gita, in the 16th chapter, Krishna speaks to this point in a couple of different verses. It says, one should understand what is duty and what is not duty by the regulations of the scriptures. Knowing such rules and regulations, one should act so that he may gradually be elevated. So what has been spoken about here, there was this amazing system, social structure that was developed under the guidance of saintly teachers in the Vedas, which helped people come to some understanding about how to live a life that brings about gradual elevation, gradual freedom from material entanglement. And so what was discussed within the Vedas, there were certain ideas that in your life you will have certain responsibilities, and you must embrace those responsibilities, act in a responsible way without deep attachment. Do not deviate from these things just on some impulse or desire. And in this way, a person learns to actually step back a little and not to be totally lost just by desire being pulled here and there. So then Krishna speaks again of this in the actual very beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, in the 2nd chapter and the 47th verse, where he tells Arjuna, you have the right to perform your prescribed duty. The duty of a warrior, the duty of an administrator, somebody that is deeply involved in the public welfare. You have a right to perform this duty attached to this position in life, but you are not entitled to the fruits of your actions. Never consider yourself the cause of the results of your activities, and never be attached to not doing your duty. So in that verse, Krishna is talking about the necessity to be able to step back, to not be lost. Like, for instance, in the case of Arjuna, if he is meant to be a warrior prince, he is meant to be leading society on a path of progressive spiritual development. He is meant to be helping with the welfare and the greater good of society, and he is meant to be imposing standards of law and order to protect the greater society. If he engages in that duty and is able to understand that it is a duty that he must and should perform, it is part of his station in life, that is good. But if he becomes overwhelmed by the fact that he has power, that he has some dominance over others, and therefore seeks to exploit that position, or he becomes very much addicted to the prestige of that office that he held, and became more fixated with that and focused on that, then one is understood to be acting fundamentally what was considered sinfully or in a very materialistic way. And there'll be a huge karmic result that will come from that, being an exploiter, either subtly or in a very gross way. But if one acts in humility with a sense of duty, one is able to become, or to escape that type of reaction. So the idea has been put forward that one should have an idea or a concept of duty associated with my position in life, whether it's to my family, to friends, to society, the job in which I work or whatever, but to become very equipoised, not to be overly attached to certain things and feeling other things are repulsive and avoiding responsibility because I don't like to do that, I don't want to do that, that's not fun for me. But this thing, oh, I love this, I can really exploit this situation, I'm going to dive into that with great enthusiasm. So Krishna makes the point that attraction and repulsion of sense objects are felt by embodied beings, but one should not fall under the control of the senses and the sense objects because they are stumbling blocks on the path of spiritual realization. So there is this whole idea that you should not be overly adverse to certain things and overly influenced or attracted to other things. You've got to find this equipoised position, live a life of responsibility and temperance, to lead a life of I'm going to say restraint not from the idea of artificially imposing hardship, but definitely to refrain from exploiting and trying to just squeeze so-called happiness or fulfillment from people, from this world and other things like that. And so this is like, oh my God, it sounds great, it sounds fantastic that one could live in this way, but is it even possible? I mean, Krishna states that therefore, without being attached to the fruits of activities, meaning to engage in activity and desire to get a certain fruit that you're very attached to, a result. Therefore, without being attached to the fruits of activities, one should act as a matter of duty. For by working without attachment, one attains the supreme. So it's like, well, what is this state? And is this some sort of like artificial thing? How do you do it? And what's your motivation? It speaks to the idea of motivation. So literally, it is possible to live within this world, to engage in what seems to everybody else as being just regular activity, but at the same time to not suffering any karmic result from doing that. So in the next talk that we do, we're going to talk about how that is possible. And this is really what karma yoga speaks to and what karma yoga is really all about, and how it is factually a path towards true happiness. Okay? Thank you very much for joining us. And before we conclude, I would just like to invite you to join with us in a short kirtan. Again, this chanting of transcendental sound, which I spoke of before. We'll be using that same mantra that we used last time, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, and invite you to join. I will begin by chanting the mantra a couple of times and invite you to then join in and respond and just become immersed in the sound. And it has a tremendously purifying and spiritualizing effect upon us and leads to full self-realization and God realization. Hari Bol, Nitai Gora Haribol, Haribol, Nitai Gora, 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 Nitai Gora avoidable.